So we know that you're working on a University of Missouri, right? Right now, and you're working of specifically you're working how to produce the content for mobile apps. So could you tell us a little more how this work is going, or what challenges you face up, and what kind of results you ask from your students?
Right. I think the biggest challenge right now is the pace of change. The way that everything is being disrupted. It's what we're spending a lot of time talking about this week is the fact that everything is changing, whether it be content creation, whether it be delivery systems, whether it be infrastructure. Everything is changing so fast that it's very difficult to be agile and adaptive in this environment. And so we have our core job, whether it's journalism or content creation or whatever it is. We know that audiences are shifting rapidly. And yet the ability to deliver the kinds of content to them in the places that they are and to sustain engagement is difficult. It's very difficult. So when you talk about building content for applications, news applications, or for news apps, that's only one part of it. I mean, we've got mobile, we've got social, we've got web, we have device considerations. So there are so many factors that we have to take into consideration that it can be daunting.
And what kind of innovation ways of producing news in apps you use in your work?
What I'm asking folks to do is to really break down the issues that they have in their newsrooms or in their content studios. So I'm asking them to really dissect the hindrances that they face, whether it be in process or whether it be in personnel or whether it be in training or whatever it is, and to, in a very microcosmic sort of way, get to solutions. One of the things that I've kind of arrived at, for instance, is that we need to be rapidly iterative in our content. And by that, I mean, we only live in the moment now. So it used to be old deadlines were the 6 o'clock news, the morning newspaper, whatever it was. The problem now is that audiences are getting information all the time, round the clock, instantaneously. And so the real challenge that comes along with that is being able to tell a progressive story, right? So tell me what's happening now and deliver it to the device or to the platform that I'm using right now. But continue to iterate that story, continue to develop it to where it services not just where I am right now, but you need to plan ahead for where I'm going to be in 6 hours and what that story is going to look like in 6 hours. So it takes a much broader, much more agile, matrix-like sort of approach to news. And that, most journalists don't think like that. Most journalists are really geared toward a more traditional storytelling approach. And when you ask them to be rapidly iterative, it kind of throws them for a loop.
Okay. This is like a technical question.
Yeah.
When you work in mobile apps, when you produce these mobile apps, in what program you work especially?
Well, so I don't create the apps, but our developers tend to be iOS. They tend to be Apple first. And the reason that they're Apple first is because Apple is closed source. It has very clear delineated guidelines. It has a very clear process for approval. And so once you get into the practice of creating applications for Apple, you know what to expect. Android is easier to access for most people. Many organizations that don't have as deep of pockets or who hope to get larger reach will go with Android. It's open source. There are many developers that can access it, and they have more latitude to create content. Android also changes its operating systems a lot more often, and when you start to talk about operating systems and platforms and that kind of thing, it starts to get complicated. Now, here's the good thing. One of the emerging things that's happening right now is sort of a adaptive app model, where Android and Apple are going to begin to cooperate a little bit, and you're going to be more iterative and agile in terms of servicing those apps. That is to say, you're not going to have to do a rebuild. You're going to be able to make small modifications, small fixes, and you're going to be able to more quickly update and iterate your news app. That's really, really important for a couple of reasons. One is that people want the latest and most up-to-date thing. That's what the app culture is. The other thing is that when you can make minor modifications and over time those start to accumulate and really become a major new look for you, that's a lot easier than going into a build phase where you have to have everything built out and completed, whereupon you release it. So this culture is much better for the way that people consume and create content.
Okay, great. Just double check. Is everything fine?
Yes.
Okay. This is a question that asked one of our students while I was a teacher. I'm also like a teacher. I had the experience of teaching journalism in my own university.
Oh, good.
So yeah, and he asked me, when we transform the old-fashioned type of newsrooms to a new one using multimedia tools, what's the main just challenge and the problem usually from your experience, from your perspective, you faced up? Because now I know that you're a consultant or working with the six different newsrooms.
Yeah.
The main just problem, obstacle that you always see, it's like a trend for all types of media.
Well, I think the biggest thing is people see obstacles, they don't see opportunities.
Okay.
And so it's more of a mindset than anything else. You know, the wonderful thing about this culture is that we have created studios that now are great equalizers because they don't cost very much to build. The micro content creation suite, and that's what I'm calling it, micro content creation suite, can consist of a DSLR camera, a desktop computer with the appropriate programs and applications on it, a telephone that you can use to create, and in under $10,000, you can create a micro content creation suite that is powerful and can compete with major network televisions. When I was at Newsy, we created 85 visual stories a day. That's more than most networks produce. Now, we had a model whereby we were curating content. So we were grabbing content from all over the world. And some of those stories had overlap because we might be creating the same kind of story for two different clients. Nonetheless, the ability for a small shop of 25 full-time employees to be creating 85 visual stories a day, 2,000 a month, that's a juggernaut of production, okay? So I would say, to answer your question, the biggest problem is having people understand that it all rests within them. In other words, the barriers are usually of their own mindset as much as they are anything else. And that's a huge challenge because people can't comprehend the possibilities, and therefore, or they don't know the road, they don't know the path, they don't know how to get there.
So just we should always try to transform our stumbling block into a stepping one, right?
Yeah. You know, I think we are the victim of our own sort of defeatist attitudes. You know, people, we don't have enough resources. The people around me don't know enough. I have people that work with me who aren't very good at what they do, or I don't know how to do what I need to do. And, you know, one of the things that we talked about yesterday was the road of 10,000 steps starts with one, right? You need to start moving assertively in the direction of transformation. And, you know, if you get too caught up in all the things you need to transform, you will quickly become unhinged. So what you need to do is you need to move progressively and to address the things you can address or that are easy to address first and make progress. And then it becomes easier. You gain momentum then.
So you said about that contact and there's just like a mental vision that limited our view for possibilities, right? So maybe you could say as 5 golden rules in preparing great, beautiful content for multimedia platforms.
Yeah, that's a challenge on the fly, but I would say the very first thing is to frame the story and to understand the iterative life of a story,
Okay.
and by that, plan. So, I think step one is have a really good plan. Because when I'm looking at a story every day, I'm thinking about what is that story right now? What is that story going to look like in 2 or 3 hours? What's it going to look like if I have a core product that's in the evening release? What's that going to look like then? And what I have to do is I have to back time out so I have to plan all the way to what I consider to be the lifespan of the story, right? And then I have to say, okay, if my goal is to develop a story that lives all the way over here, now I have to back time that at each phase and say, what do I think the story's looking like now? That's pretty self-evident usually. But what's it going to look like in a couple hours? How do I evolve? Here's the other challenge.
Prediction.
Pardon?
Prediction?
A little bit predictive,
Okay.
yes, but it is strategic and it is somewhat documented by listening. Okay, and so this is rule 2, to your point.
Okay.
Plan, yes, but listen. And listen should probably go 1. In this day and age of social media, stories usually already live out somewhere in the World Wide Web or wherever they live. And so one of the things that's very important is to listen to what the story is and to be constantly monitoring that. Listening to audience as well as to sources, as well as to whatever the chatter is about a story, helps you to stay relevant in the moment. Okay? I always say, why do you have 2 ears and 1 mouth? So you can listen more than you talk. Well, that's really important as a journalist in terms of understanding. So I think listening actually becomes number 1.
Okay.
2 becomes have a plan. And really that plan needs to look at the lifespan of a story. Okay. 3 would be have ironclad processes. Understand what you can create, how quickly you can create it, and move quickly, particularly to have processes that are thinking about all the platforms where your content is consumed. Okay. So is it consumed on mobile? And if within mobile, is it on your application or your mobile website? Is it on social? Which social platforms? And so really having processes that quickly, for instance, having a social manager like Hootsuite to manage what goes to Twitter, what goes to Facebook, what goes to whatever. Having processes in place helps to efficiently expedite the release of content in real time. And you have to be relevant every moment. And if you're not relevant every moment, then you're in trouble. And that goes to process. So that's really important. The 4th, probably golden rule is tell a good story, know a good story. Okay? Storytelling is at a premium now. And it's at a premium for journalists. It's at a premium for brands. It's at a premium for social. When you see stuff, any kind of stuff, that's resonating in the marketplace, the constant is usually that it's a really good story. In other words, it's not just information. It's not just words or text. It's not just video. It's a story. And in much the same way as when we were children, we loved it when our parents read us stories. The key to really good content producers is tell me a good story. Storytelling has never been at more of a premium. Storytelling also goes to other things. It goes to being factual. It goes to being trusted, right? It goes to being a trusted source of information. But telling good stories over and over again builds brand awareness, but it also, so that's the 4th of your 5, right?
Yep.
The final one is this. I think this is really, really important. Add value. Add value. So there's a ton of content out there these days, right? There's clutter.
So you said about 5 golden rules. But and you also mentioned about the uh, period of news, right? So you can should just have some feel of prediction. But from news perspective, when you produce every day huge amount of content, how it's possible to keep all these rules?
Well, it's actually the systems help you to stay within the boundaries of your rules. I mean, if you have very disciplined processes, if you have very disciplined expectations, um, I think the thing that we discovered was the more disciplined we were, and discipline, a lot of people look at discipline and they think, oh, that's work. Discipline is an onus. It's heavy. No, discipline is the thing that frees you. It frees you to create more content. It frees you to have more fun. And if you have disciplined processes and procedures and expectations, you amaze yourself at your capabilities because there's less to doubt. There's less wiggle room, right?
So that is the secret sauce that helps to Newsy to be the first one, or one of the.
Yeah, I always say, people say, well, why did Newsy sell for $35 million? It must have been a really cool product, and it was. Or it must have been a really cool idea, and it was. But I think the thing that ultimately was an appeal, and I don't really know because the sale happened after I left, but my sense is that the thing that they really wanted to do is they wanted to know, how do you do this? How do you create this much content that is this good, this quickly, and get it to the marketplace? And because this is a great challenge for any news organization on the planet, right? And I think that the secret sauce at Newsy was in its workflow and mindset, not in its product, not in its audience, not in its. It was very much in how we went about doing things on a day-to-day basis, and it seemed effortless. When people would walk in the room, we'd have rock music going on overhead. We'd have snacks, and people would be drinking sodas. They might take a break. It had a very agency feel to it. But everyone knew what the expectation was. They were exceedingly well trained. They were disciplined in their processes. We had very good internally developed systems and procedures. So we knew everything. We had taken all of the guesswork out of creating. And we also didn't have to go out and do interviews, the kinds of things that wait for sources. We didn't have to do those things, okay? So there were some built-in things that made us much more efficient as well. We didn't have any waiting room or anything that we had to stop for.
Well, just a quick questions. In 1 hour, how many videos do you produce usually in news?
Well, yeah, I mean, we tried to get away from that. I mean, if you just did the simple math and you did 24 hours and you did 85 videos, because we were 24/7, I mean, we were around the clock. You'd probably come up with 3.5 videos or whatever an hour, okay? And when you have 6 or 7 people in the room, does that sound like a lot or not? I don't know. But when you talk about 85 videos a day, people are like, well, that's pretty impressive. If you say 3.5 videos an hour, we never thought about, well, I won't say we never thought about. We shifted our thought away from how many people we had, how many videos we produced. We got away from the quantity game after we established that we could do it. Okay, so the first thing we had to do was we had to prove to ourselves and to everyone else that we could scale content. Scaling content is where the potential to monetize comes in. But that's a shotgun approach. Then what we did was we ratcheted it back and we started thinking about the bullet, the silver bullet, the thing that, what are the best videos we can produce? So it wasn't about how much we could produce, but in fact, what was the best quality we could produce, what was the best. And so I wouldn't want to get too caught up in volume, because volume itself is not the answer. Make sense?
Okay.
The number of stories that you produce, that's not the answer.
Okay.
It's part of the answer, because you have to be able to scale content. You have to be able to build lots of content. But more is not better. So just because you can do 100 videos doesn't mean that's better than doing 60. Okay.
So in this case, if you just have a theme to cover some boring issues like opening new museum
Yeah.
hometown.
Yeah.
How will you do it more interesting for your audience?
Opening of a new museum?
Right, right.
Yeah. Well, one of the first things I'm going to do is I'm going to do a slideshow.
Okay.
I'm going to get that slideshow of pictures up as quickly as possible.
Okay.
I'm going to go in and I'm going to do a video. And I'm going to make it as artistic a video as I possibly can, because you can paint a wonderful picture of a museum with words, but if it's a new museum and you show it to me, that's a completely different thing altogether. So I'm not saying abandon text, but wherever possible, show me something. And when it's a new museum, show me what is distinct about it, because there are a lot of museums out there.
Okay.
And there are a lot of museums, frankly, that I don't want to go to because they're boring.
Yeah.
But when it's a really cool museum, so I would say slideshows,
Right.
video,
Yeah.
Interviews with people who are going to the museum, and also the curators and the people who made the museum happen. I think historical context about the museum. I think what you want to do is you want to think about, how do I tell this story from a number of different ways, particularly visual ways that make it compelling, because features and in your scenario, the museum, I want to see it.
Okay. Could you say just a few words about your experience that when you transform a new sitcom from a web platform and just start to provide information through the mobile apps?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and this is, I certainly can't take credit for that. There's so many people within the organization, including our president and our founder, um, who really had the foresight to understand that mobile was the coming thing. And so the big thing that I would say is, when we were a .com, we were just another .com in a sea of .coms, and we did not resonate as well as we had hoped. But by becoming aware of mobile, of how our product would thrive in mobile, and we thought that video news content would thrive in mobile because people like to consume videos on mobile. We decided to take matters into our own hands. We went to the developers conference. So we went to the place where the nerds hang out as journalists and said, "Hi nerds, what are you developing? Well, tell us more about that. Well, tell us why that would work. Okay, so if we had this, what would that look like?" So we went to a place nobody else was going, and we asked a lot of important questions. What that did was that allowed us to prepare a product for market, so that when the iPad, in the summer of 2010, when the iPad was first delivered to mailboxes the world over, our iPad application, our news app, was already on that device. It was one of the first news applications to be on that device. And Apple wrote us up and said, "Here's one you ought to try. This is really good. You can get video on this. This really plays well and optimizes on our device." So Apple was serving itself. They also served us. They did that 4 times in 8 weeks. We became the #1 news application on the iPad in the world. In the world. Head of the New York Times, head of, you name a news organization, the Wall Street Journal, the Guardian. #1 in the world on the iPad. Most consumed, most downloaded app. Now, that was a small universe, but everybody was trying to get on that device, and they were looking at news applications and saying, "Well, what works?" And they kept hearing about Newsy. And then we won the Appy, and we beat out CNN for the Appy, by the way. Okay, CNN, which puts a lot of 2010.
Okay.
We also won an Appy in 2013, but that was for design. So what I would say about transforming a company is gather as much information as you can. Know what's coming to the best of your ability. Do your research. Go the extra mile. Be ready. Because when opportunity presents itself, it's usually in a very small window. And if you're not prepared in that window, then you will miss the opportunity. We were prepared. And in that moment, it transformed the entire trajectory of our company. That wasn't something I did. That was something other people in our company did. And it was brilliant.
Before my last question, I can ask you this question. You work in the Philippines and South Korea.
Mm-hmm.
So could you tell us a little more about this experience?
Yeah, I mean, it was very early in my career. So, I was in graduate school at Missouri, and I had a professor who came to me and said, "What are you going to do when you graduate?" And I said, "I don't really know what I'm going to do." And he said, "Well, I have an opportunity for you to go and to work for the Korean broadcasting system in Korea and to work for Radio Korea. Are you interested?" And I said, "Yeah." I mean, I'd wanted to live overseas, to travel a little bit. And so, through a connection, he said, "Well, I think you're really good at what you do, so let's send you there." And so, at the age of 27, I moved to Seoul. I was the English language editor for Radio Korea. We were shortwave radio then. The World Wide Web was not a thing. I mean, it was a very small thing. Let's put it that way. And it was a different world. It was a world where there was shortwave radio wavelengths going across the ocean. So we had a very small audience, but it was, I'm a big believer that the collective experiences that you have shape your point of view. And had I not worked at Radio Korea, I would have never been able to walk into Newsy and to be able to have the perspective I had about that organization. Radio Korea had 12 languages, and it had 4 people in each language division. And they created bucket loads of content, those 4 people, to service the entire product 7 days a week. So I knew the power of what people who are well-trained, what small teams could do if given the proper resources. It was a seminal moment in terms of my understanding. We ended up building out languages for Newsy based upon my knowledge of the model of Radio Korea. And we ended up selling our Chinese to the Wall Street Journal Asia. Just not selling, but selling our content to the Wall Street Journal Asia as a result of that mindset that I created 25 years before at Radio Korea.
Interesting. And my last question. I know that you were invited to the ABC channel, to the Larry King Live program.
Yeah.
So how it was to be near the Larry King?
Well, it's an interesting story. So I joined them remotely. So I wasn't actually sitting in Larry King's studio. I was covering a terrible crime story. And it was a crime story where a woman had been murdered for her baby. And she was about to give birth, and another woman wanted a baby and couldn't have one. So she conjured up a very complicated story, and she murdered the woman and actually removed the baby from the victim's womb. It was an awful, gruesome, terrible story. The problem with the story was that no one officially knew many facts. And yet, because it was so sensational and awful, the networks wanted more information. They wanted as much information as they could. It was the 24/7 news cycle. So Larry King's producers called my boss and said, "Do you have a reporter who's been up at the scene who can enlighten us as to the nuances of the story, the backstory, to help us understand?" You have to realize that the officials were not going to say anything because it was an ongoing investigation, and they had not even made an arrest at that point, or maybe they had just made an arrest. So the long and short of it was, when they called me, they said, "We're probably not even going to go to you. We just want you to be on standby in case we want clarification on the story." So I got into my seat, and they did the camera check, and the show opens, and Larry King says, "Good evening, awful crime in Missouri, and we're going to start off by going to Jim Flink in Kansas City to give us all the details." And I was like, "What?" And in that moment, I'm like, and so somehow I tap danced my way through the first 60 seconds and didn't make a complete buffoon of myself. And in fact, there is a transcript out there, and it actually reads quite well. I'm surprised. But I was so shocked that it took me a minute of just like my mind was racing. Well, it turned out it was an hour-long show, and it was really good because one of the investigating officers was from the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigations, and he was a friend of mine. And I knew that he couldn't say anything. one of the other folks was the prosecutor, and I knew he wasn't going to say anything. And so it ended up that I was able to piece together the events as they unfolded through myriad sources, and to be able to tell people what happened, A, then B, then C, how the murder took place, who the murderer was, how she knew the victim, even though it appeared they were complete strangers, how she knew to time the murder at such a time where the baby was viable. All of those things I pieced together. And at one point, Larry King asked my friend, the FBI agent, he said, "So, Jeff, do you have anything to dispute or to add to Jim's story?" And Jeff was like, "No, Larry, he's pretty much got it." Mm-hmm. And at that point, it was very validating for me as a reporter, because no one had put all of those things on that timeline. And on network television, I was able to do that. And so it was one of those moments where you go, wow, how did that happen? And it's just good reporting.
Yeah. So this is like the aim of journalism, to show things that could not be.
Sometimes officials can't say. Sometimes they can't say because it jeopardizes an investigation, or because there's so many more things that need to come together, or they have something going on in the background. A journalist's job is to, as factually and accurately as possible, tell the story based upon the best information that they have. And yeah, the story that I reported that night was the story for the next 2 years on through the trial. It was consistent. It was bulletproof. It was, had it right.
That's really inspiring.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a pretty cool moment. You don't get many of those.
Yes, thank you so much.
You're welcome.